Miss Emma Pendleton was not, as a rule, given to impulsive behavior. She was, in fact, rather famous for her prudence. It was a quality her late mother had despaired of, a quality her father, the Viscount Ashworth, relied upon, and a quality that had, at the advanced age of 24, left her firmly on the shelf. Which is why she surprised herself far more than anyone else when she looked at the Duke of Wycliffe across the width of his own library and said, "This is a terrible idea." The Duke of Wycliffe, a man so imposing that even his eyebrows seemed to have been carved from granite, did not so much as flinch. "I am aware. We barely know one another. We have been introduced on 3 separate occasions. Last spring, at the Hathaway Ball. 2 years prior, at my own brother's wedding. And Tuesday last, at Lady Jersey's drum." He ticked each instance off on his long, elegant fingers. "That is 3 times more than many couples who enter into the parson's trap." Emma's lips twitched. "You keep a ledger of our meetings?" "I keep a ledger of everything," he said, his voice a deep, uninflected rumble. "It is how I manage my estates. It is how I manage my life. It is, I am discovering, not particularly conducive to finding a wife." This was, Emma reflected, the most honest thing any man had ever said to her. The Duke was not a man given to flattery or soft words. He was, by all accounts, a man of cold logic and rigid duty. He was also, if the rumors were to be believed, in desperate need of an heir and a duchess to manage his household before the season ended. And Emma, with her modest dowry, her unremarkable beauty, and her utter lack of interest in the simpering games of the ton, was in desperate need of a life that did not involve being a perpetual guest in her sister's home. "You wish for a marriage of convenience," she stated, her voice calm. "I wish for a marriage of sense," he corrected. "I have no need for a fortune, and I have even less need for a wife who will faint at the sight of a ledger book. I require a partner. An individual who can manage a household, who will not create scandal, and who understands that my time and energies are largely committed to my properties." He paused, his dark eyes, the color of strong coffee, meeting hers without a trace of guile. "You are sensible, Miss Pendleton. You are well-bred, well-spoken, and you do not giggle. It is a refreshing combination." It was, without a doubt, the most unromantic proposal in the history of the British peerage. And Emma found that she liked it immensely. "You paint a very flattering portrait, Your Grace," she said dryly. "How can a woman resist such poetic declarations?" For the first time, something that might have been a flicker of amusement crossed his face. "I have never been accused of poetry. I assure you, the accusation will not stick." Emma rose from her chair and walked to the window, looking out over the square. She thought of her sister, Belinda, and her well-meaning but exhausting attempts to relaunch her onto the marriage mart. She thought of her nephews, who were delightful in small doses but exhausting in large ones. She thought of the quiet, the peace, the simple dignity of having her own home, her own purpose. She turned back to face him. "If we are to enter into this arrangement, Your Grace, we must be clear on the terms." He nodded, gesturing for her to continue. "I will manage your household. I will provide you with an heir, if that is what God wills. I will not embarrass you in public." She took a breath. "And you will allow me my own pursuits. I read a great deal. And I have an interest in the estate's accounts. I should like to be involved in the charitable decisions, at the very least." The Duke's dark brows rose a fraction of an inch. It was, for him, the equivalent of a gasp of astonishment. "You wish to review the estate accounts?" "I wish to have a purpose beyond choosing the dinner menu," she clarified. "You said yourself you want a partner. A partner does not merely decorate a drawing room." He was silent for a long moment, his gaze assessing. Finally, he inclined his head. "Agreed. I will have my solicitor draw up the contracts. There will be a generous allowance, of course, and full control over the London house and Wycliffe Abbey. As for the other terms of the marriage..." He looked away, a muscle tightening in his jaw. "I will not importune you. We will share a bed as is necessary for the continuation of my line, but beyond that, your time and your person are your own." It was a brutally practical statement, and Emma knew she should feel relieved. She did feel relieved. This was precisely what she had signed on for. An arrangement. A business contract. And yet, as she looked at his austere, handsome face, she felt a tiny, traitorous flicker of something else. Something that wondered what it might be like to be importuned by the Duke of Wycliffe. She squashed it immediately. Sensible girls did not have such thoughts. Then I believe we have an agreement, Your Grace, she said, extending her hand. He rose and crossed the room to her, his large frame seeming to swallow the light. He took her hand in his grip warm and firm. We do, Miss Pendleton. His thumb brushed, ever so lightly, over her knuckles. It was a fleeting touch, barely there, but it sent a shiver straight up her arm. Emma's eyes flew to his. He was looking at their joined hands, a strange, almost puzzled expression on his face. He released her as if had been burned. I shall call on your father tomorrow. Yes, Emma whispered, her sensible heart hammering a frantic, foolish rhythm against her ribs. Tomorrow the wedding was a quiet affair, held at St. George's in Hanover Square with only a handful of relatives in attendance. Alexander Avery, the 5th Duke of Wycliffe, stood at the altar and watched his sensible bride walk towards him. She was dressed in a simple gown of pale blue silk, her honey-colored hair arranged in a neat, unadventurous style. She looked composed. Proper. Everything he had asked for. And yet, as she placed her gloved hand in his, he was assailed by the memory of that brief, accidental touch in his library. The softness of her skin. The surprised flash of heat in her intelligent hazel eyes. He had spent the intervening fortnight trying to convince himself it was a trick of his imagination. He was a man who had long ago learned to subdue his passions, to view the world through the cool lens of logic. Desire was an inconvenience, a distraction from duty. He had indulged in it, of course, in his youth, but it was a need he satisfied with practiced, emotionless efficiency, far from the hallowed halls of his family homes. This was different. This was his wife. He repeated the words in his head like a mantra. My wife. A partner. A sensible arrangement. They spent their wedding night in the Duke's London townhouse, in separate chambers. It was, as agreed, a sensible decision. Emma was grateful for the reprieve, for the time to add just to her new reality. She lay in her vast, canopied bed, staring at the ceiling and trying not to think about the man sleeping just 2 doors away. The days that followed fell into a comfortable, if formal, pattern. Mornings were spent with the housekeeper, reviewing menus and schedules. Afternoons, the Duke was often at his club or with his man of business. Evenings, they dined together, their conversation polite and wide-ranging. They discussed politics, books, the latest audits from the Ton. They did not discuss them. It was during one of these dinners, a week into their marriage, that the first crack appeared in their carefully constructed wall of civility. The mutton is excellent, Your Grace, Emma said, dabbing her lips with her napkin. Wycliffe, he said, not looking up from his plate. I beg your pardon? My name. It is Alexander. Or Alex. If we are to be partners, you might as well use it. He took a sip of his wine. Wycliffe makes me feel as if I am about to be served with a writ. Emma smiled, a real smile, the first she had given him since their wedding. Alex, she tried. It felt strange on her tongue, intimate in a way that a formal title was not. He looked up at the sound of his name. His eyes, usually so guarded, softened for a fraction of a second. That is better. Very well, Alex, she said, emboldened. The mutton is excellent. It is, he agreed. He set down his fork. I have been meaning to ask you about the estate accounts. You mentioned a desire to review them. I have a summary from the Abbey. Would you care to look them over after dinner? Emma blinked, surprised. She had made the request, but she hadn't truly expected him to remember, let alone follow through. I would like that very much. An hour later, they were seated together in the library, a large, leather-bound ledger open on the desk before them. Alex stood behind her, pointing out various entries, his voice a low rumble near her ear. He smelled of sandalwood and paper. Emma tried to concentrate on the columns of figures, but she was acutely aware of his proximity. The tenants at Hollingsworth Farm have had a difficult year, he was saying, his finger tracing a line of neat script. I've waived a portion of their rent. Emma looked at the deduction, then up at him. That was kind. He shrugged, looking uncomfortable. It was practical. A good farmer is worth more than a season's rent. If they'd been evicted, the land would have fallen fallow. You can call it practical if you like, Emma said softly. But it was also kind. Their eyes met. The air in the room seemed to thicken. He was so close. She could see the tiny lines at the corners of his eyes, the strong line of his jaw, the way his dark hair curled slightly against his collar. Emma, he said, his voice a low rasp. He said her name as if it were a question, a plea. Her own name, a word she had heard thousands of times, sounded foreign and precious on his lips. He lifted his hand and, with the lightest of touches, brushed a stray curl from her cheek. His fingers lingered, trailing down the side of her neck. Emma's breath caught. This was not in the arrangement. This was not sensible. This was everything she had told herself she did not want. And she wanted it desperately. He must have seen the answer in her eyes, because he groaned, a low sound of surrender, and lowered his head. His kiss was not the polite, perfunctory peck she had anticipated from a marriage of convenience. It was acclaiming. His mouth was warm and firm, moving over hers with a confidence that stole her breath and her sanity. Her hands came up to grasp his lapels, not to push him away, but to steady herself in a world that had suddenly tilted on its axis. When he finally lifted his head, they were both breathing heavily. He rested his forehead against hers. That, he said, his voice rough, was not in the agreement. No, she whispered, her heart soaring. It was not. He kissed her again, and this time, there was no hesitation, no practicality. There was only heat and want and the startling, wonderful realization that a practical decision had just led to the most unexpected passion. For a man who prided himself on order, Alexander found his life had become wonderfully, chaotically disordered. His sensible duchess had become his obsession. Their evenings, once a polite exchange of ideas, now ended in a tangle of limbs and whispered endearments in whichever room they happened to be in. The library, her sitting room, his bedchamber, no corner of the townhouse was safe from their newly discovered passion. And yet, as the weeks passed, Alex began to realize that it was not just the passion that undid him. It was her. Emma. The way she laughed at his dry observations. The way her eyes lit up when she found a mistake in the estate ledgers. The way she took a shy, elderly tenant farmer under her wing, ensuring he had enough coal for the winter. She was everything he had never known he wanted, and the thought terrified him. He had built his life on the principle of avoiding pain. He had watched his own parents' marriage, a cold, distant arrangement that had left his mother bitter and his father remote. Love, he had decided, was a dangerous fiction. It was safer, saner, to build a life on respect and duty. But what he felt for Emma was neither safe nor sane. It was a reckless, all-consuming need that made him want to abandon his ledgers and his estates and simply be with her. Emma, for her part, was blissfully happy. She had not known it was possible to feel so much. She threw herself into her new role as duchess, but her greatest joy was the time she spent with her husband. She loved the way his stern face would soften when she entered a room. She loved the private smiles he gave her, smiles no one else ever saw. One afternoon, they were taking a turn in Hyde Park. It was a crisp autumn day, and the park was filled with fashionable carriages and riders. As they walked, Alex's hand rested possessively at the small of her back, a gesture that was both proper and intimately, thrillingly theirs. They were stopped by Lord and Lady Marchmain, a garrulous couple known for their love of gossip. "Your Grace! Duchess!" Lady Marchmain trilled. "How delightful to see you looking so. Well, marriage clearly agrees with you both." Alex gave a curt, polite nod. Emma smiled. "We were just saying to Lord Chesterfield how wonderfully matched you are," Lady Marchmain continued, her eyes gleaming with a reporter's zeal. "Such a sensible union. So practical. One hears it was all arranged in a matter of days. Quite the business transaction, was it not?" Emma felt Alex stiffen beside her. The words, true as they were, felt like a slap. A business transaction. Was that all anyone saw? Alex's voice was ice. "My marriage, Lady Marchmain, is no one's business but my own. Good day." He steered Emma away, his jaw tight. They walked in silence for several minutes. "She was merely repeating what everyone thinks," Emma said quietly, her gaze fixed on the path ahead. "It is what we agreed upon, after all." Alex stopped, turning to face her. His eyes were fierce, tormented. "Is that what you think? That this is still just an agreement to you?" Emma's heart clenched. "Of course not, but nothing," he cut her off, his voice raw. He took her hands in his, holding them tightly. "I did not enter into this marriage looking for love, Emma. I did not believe in it. I thought it was a myth, a pretty story we tell ourselves to make the cold realities of life more bearable." He swallowed hard. "I was wrong. You have proven me wrong. Every day, in every way, you have proven me wrong." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "Alex. I love you," he said, the words tumbling out as if he could no longer contain them. "I know it was not part of the bargain. I know it is not sensible or practical. But I love you, Emma." And the thought that you might still see this as merely a transaction is. It is more than I can bear. Emma laughed, a watery, joyful sound. She reached up and cupped his face in her hands, right there in the middle of Hyde Park, scandal be damned. You impossible, wonderful man, she whispered. Do you think I spend my nights in your arms because of a signed contract? Do you think I fell in love with your ledgers? She rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his, a brief, fierce kiss. I love you, Alexander Avery. I love you with every sensible, impractical bone in my body. He stared at her for a long moment, as if he could not quite believe her words. Then, a slow, beautiful smile spread across his face, a smile that reached his eyes and transformed him utterly. My sensible Duchess, he murmured, pulling her close. My impractical Duke, she whispered back, resting her head against his chest. And as they stood there, wrapped in each other, the cool autumn air swirling around them, the Duke and Duchess of Wycliffe realized that the most unexpected passion had grown from the most practical of seeds. It was not an arrangement. It was not a transaction. It was, and would forever be, a love story. The end. If you love this story and want more, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with a fellow romance lover, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new tale.